We marvel sometimes at the amazing computing power that all of us hold nowadays in our pockets, in our hands, just at all times. In your phone, you have something that would have been science fiction 20 years ago, 25 years ago. The computing power that would be on a machine, a big computer back in the 80s or 90s that would have struggled to run Oregon Trail. You'd need 1,000 of those, 10,000 of those to equal the computing power that you have in your phone at all times. And that, of course, connects to a network of information that you can access instantaneously. You input your desired search, and in less than a second, you have every answer that humanity has yet compiled on that subject. It's a really incredible thing. Can be used as a benefit, of course, but more than anything else, it just sort of boggles our mind, the power that you hold in being able to do that. We should recognize, however, that if we are talking about raw power, efficiency, what you have in your skull, what you carry above your shoulders at all times, is an even more incredible supercomputer. The power of the human brain, more efficient by far than any machinery mankind has yet invented. Think of the number of processes that you can carry out at any given time. Walking while you talk to someone, and think of song lyrics as they're talking back to you, and all the different kinds of things that we're able to do with our brains. Far more incredible than that iPhone. Well, our question this morning, I think, is an appropriate one to ask in view of what we do possess. What do you do with all of that computing power? You in particular. Where does your mind go when you leave it to sort of drift? You're not concentrated on a task at work. You're not actively engaged in conversation with your spouse or whatever it might be. You just have time to think. What do you do? What do you turn all of that raw power towards? People have always had time to think. You can think while you're carrying out the kind of menial tasks and chores that people have been doing around homes for as long as people have had homes. You can think on your commute to work. I recently saw, just in the last couple of days, a statistic that I don't have any reason to doubt. It seems to make sense, at least to me. I don't know what their methodology was in arriving at it, but that the average commute time for North Americans, at least, has remained around 30 minutes for about 300 years. That just for a very long time, maybe years and years ago, that meant I live a couple of miles from the field and I have to go that far on foot to get there. Or maybe I live a few more miles farther out and I take my horse or mule to get there. Or now I live 15 miles away from work and I take a freeway to get there and there's traffic, so it takes a little bit of time. Or if you live in Houston, where we came from right before here, I live down the street from work and there's traffic, so it takes me 3 hours to get there. Whatever the case might be, the average time, the median or the middle area that most of us find ourselves in, give or take 30 minutes. Well, that's been pretty consistent throughout human history, that you've had some time where you're just going somewhere. And you don't have to think about each foot in front of the other or applying the correct pressure to the gas pedal. You have a little bit of time for your mind to do something. What do you do with it? I would say that today we seem on average to have more time alone than we might have in previous eras. Humans are becoming less social in many ways. We have more time that is just devoted, and we even have a phrase for it we use now, me time, that I'm just going to use for myself. A lot of that involves thinking. No company, no friends, no family, only your own thoughts to entertain you. If the most important and valuable resource we have is our minds, and I think it well might be, then it's critical that we nurture that. that we use it in the right way, that we feed it and maintain it in the correct way, so that it'll be used to maximum benefit, especially as disciples of Christ. And that, I believe, is Paul's point here in Philippians chapter 4, verses 8 and 9, where I want to spend our time this morning, where Paul is stressing the importance of using brain power in a spiritually productive way. Let's read just these two verses together in Philippians 4 and then derive some thoughts from there. We are thankful that you're with us this morning. I'll pause for just a moment to add that to the greetings that have already been offered. We have a good number of people with us today, many of you here as visitors, and we're grateful for that. But we simply are thankful for any time that we can share together as people of God, desiring to look into things that He has said to us and deriving benefit from that. That's what we're hoping to accomplish today in honoring God, returning worship to Him. Hope that that has been productive and useful for you this morning, and that now we can engage our minds together in consideration of this passage. Philippians 4, let's read together in verses 8 and 9. This is the ESV on the screen there, and I'll mention some things about word choice and translation in just a moment. But in Philippians 4, beginning in verse 8, Paul writes, "Finally, brothers, whatever is true, whatever is honorable, whatever is just, whatever is pure, whatever is lovely, whatever is commendable. If there's any excellence, if there's anything worthy of praise, think about these things. What you've learned and received and heard and seen in me, practice these things, and the God of peace will be with you." Well, the first question we want to ascertain or answer this morning is, why is it important? We'll get to the things themselves, the thoughts, the specifics of this sort of exercise that Paul is talking about in a moment. But first consider the potential or the desired outcomes. When he says, think on these things, that's one particular word choice I don't love. Meditate on these things, maybe a better way of putting into mind what we're talking about. But why do that? Why is Paul telling them, think about this, commit your mind to this exercise? What's to be gained from it? Well, first of all, let's say, as a counter to anxiety, in context here in this passage in Philippians 4, Paul is most concerned with removing stress and removing worry from the mind of a Christian. You see there in verses 6 and 7, he says it as plainly as one can. Be anxious for nothing. Remove anxiety, worry, undue concern, whatever term you want to give to it. Paul says, if you're in Christ, if you're a Christian, it's not appropriate to have that anxiety at all times. Let your requests instead be made known to God. Go to Him in prayer, unburden yourself of that worry and that anxiety. And he talks in verse 7 about the peace of God that will then come to you in this guardian way. It will guard your hearts and minds. The peace of God. You see in verse 9, the counterpoint to that, or the flip of that, he discusses there the God of peace who will be with you in our passage. Down in verses 11 through 13, he goes back to the idea of being content, of having learned how to do without and how to do with surplus, how to do with people treating you well and how to do with people treating you terribly, how to get by no matter what, knowing that through Christ, I'm strengthened to do all things. Well, that's removing worry. That's finding peace. So that is directly tied to what we're seeing in verse 8. It's within that same setting, within that same context. I think we can say accurately, when our minds are properly ordered, when I've meditated on and considered rightly the things that I should, one of the benefits of that is a peaceful mind, a mind that is at rest, a mind that is not anxious. That is one of the key outcomes. It's a byproduct. Secondly, let's say this is a useful exercise as a means of training our thoughts, disciplining our thoughts. This is kind of obvious as the goal, I guess. We've already been discussing it in this sense, but it warrants repeating or clarifying, spelling out that this is what we're doing when we meditate on these things. And I mentioned a moment ago that translation. That's kind of the only part I don't like about that ESV translation on the screen. Think about these things. That's a bit weaker than intended to me. The idea is of a pondering, a considering, a dwelling upon, a meditating upon. It's not, the thought passed my mind. Yeah, I thought about it. No, I've really thought about it. I've really committed myself to poring it over, rolling it over in my mind. And the things listed, as we'll see shortly when we go into the specifics there, that doesn't constitute Paul merely telling us, think happy thoughts, as a way of sort of clearing our minds when we feel unhappy by picturing a puppy rolling around in clover. That's what you do. You just get rid of all of it. Think on these things. Think of some good stuff that makes you feel happy, and there you go. Then you'll feel better, won't you? Well, maybe that works on kind of a surface level. That's not what Paul is talking about. Instead, by truly considering, by deeply considering only those things which are virtuous and excellent and praiseworthy, we are training our minds so that they will, in essence, be incapable of going elsewhere. You've had that before, haven't you? With something that is going on in your mind that got stuck there, maybe a thought or even a general mindset that you just kind of couldn't shake. And the more you thought about it, the harder it was to think about anything else, to the point where you are just kind of consumed with that thought or with that train of thought. Oftentimes it's a negative thing, like worry, like the kind of things Paul is telling us to abandon here. But it can be, and for a Christian it should be, the kind of thing we do in a positive sense. That's what we're trying to accomplish. That we're training ourselves to think and putting ourselves in a headspace where all that is being processed there are things that are worthy, that are virtuous. Instead of following our minds wherever they might lead and just letting it kind of run off on its own, we bring every thought into captivity. We nourish them with healthy food. We treat our minds as they should be treated and train them to consider things that are worthwhile. That's what Paul is getting at. Well, third idea, and we see it there in verse 9, we train our minds as preparation for action. That's the end outcome of the process, and Paul especially shifts into that mode there in verse 9, where we see the goal all along is not thought, but practice. And that practice means action. It means do these things. Habitually do these things that we're talking about, that you've seen, that you've heard from me, all that I have taught. That's what we want to get to. So we can see sort of the process that's taking place there. We dwell on excellent things, virtuous things, so that our minds will even more easily and more often be operating with excellent, virtuous thoughts, so that when any situation is put before us, we will more often and more easily act in a virtuous way. Because that's what I've been thinking about. That's what I've been preparing myself for. Those are the kinds of things that would occur naturally to me because I'm in that mind frame. It's preparing me to do what I want to do, what I should be doing. So what are these thoughts that we're dealing with? We'll spend the remainder of our time just considering some of what Paul is actually getting at. I've already classified them as Paul does there in verse 8, towards the end of verse 8, as excellent or virtuous, depending on your translation, and praiseworthy. And those are general descriptions that the other phrases there at the beginning of verse 8 sort of paint in more detailed strokes. But they are, in short, all that is good and right. That first word, excellent or virtuous, where Paul says if there's any excellence, it's a common word, very, very common in classical Greek writings, in ancient Greek literature. It comes up over and over and over again. It has very strong associations with Greek philosophy, with Greek morality. You find all of the ancient writers talking about the things that are excellent, the things that are virtuous. Paul, in his writing, uses it once. He uses it this one time. As many times as Paul talks to us about Christian virtues, about things that are good, about things that are right, about things that are excellent, and he uses other terms for it. But this kind of most famous, most ubiquitous Greek term for it, he uses only one time here in this writing. It's a sort of general catch-all term for what is right. And maybe is used here, Paul using it this one time, to describe things that are right even across all upbringings or cultures, even for these Philippians, many of whom were probably pagans beforehand, probably were not Jews, but grew up worshiping the Greek gods, worshiping the Roman gods, a very Latinized city. Many of them had been taught some things that would be universally accepted, Christian, non-Christian alike. No matter what continent you live on, no matter what language you speak, there are certain things that all men agree are excellent, are right, are appropriate to do. But they find their greatest expression in Christ. Still, Paul is saying you recognize those for what they are. You've been around them your entire lives. You see them. It's simply put that which is right, which is excellent. Well, the second idea there, if there's anything worthy of praise. And again, we see there are certain qualities or certain decisions that elicit a sort of universal approval from God and from man, regardless of background. Like how Barclay describes it, in a sense, it's true that the Christian never thinks of the praise of men, but in another sense, it is true that every good man is uplifted and moved by the praise of good men. And that's worth considering. That when I do something which is right, I know it to be right, that others who know what is right and who know God and who love God and pursue things that are excellent would not look at my deeds and say, he's done wrong, I don't know what's going on, but that what I do would be praiseworthy. It's kind of the Proverbs 31 idea of the woman whose children praise her in the gates, whose husband calls her blessed, who see the goodness with what they are doing. So we have that general idea of things that are virtuous, that are excellent, that are praiseworthy. What about the particulars? Some have called them the true countries of the mind, the place where we want our thoughts to dwell. Where, as a Christian, does my mind travel and stay and make its home? What do excellent and praiseworthy thoughts look like, specifically? Well, he says first, they are true. Whatever is true. This applies in a number of ways. In the basic sense, we would say that our thoughts are accurate and truthful. Especially think of what I think of when I think of God, when I turn my mind to Christ, when I think about salvation, when I think about my responsibilities to God. Do I have an accurate picture of those things? Do I see God as He truly is, as He has explained Himself to me? Or do I have a misconception, a half-truth conception of who and what He is? Is it truthful? Maybe on a more grounded and a more kind of interpersonal level. When I'm interacting with or thinking about someone in my quiet hours, is it an accurate picture? Think of the times you're alone, you're thinking, maybe you're rehearsing a conversation you're going to have with someone the next day, an interaction that you feel likely you'll have with someone, or a phone call you need to make. And so I'm not the only one that does this, right? You play that out in your head and you kind of say, all right, I'm going to start by saying this, and then, maybe they'll say X, Y, Z. You kind of have that brain-generated AI that you have stand in as them. They'll do this and they'll act like that. When I'm doing that, Am I using an accurate portrayal of that person? When I think afterward about how that conversation went, am I being truthful to what happened? Or do I do what we tend to do and are often tempted to do? Well, when we had that conversation, I was really honest, and I remained very calm, and I said a lot of things that were very smart, and I conducted myself really well. The other person, they started getting angry, and they weren't being truthful, and they were doing this, that, and the other, and so, I did as well as I could in that interaction, and the other person really messed things up. Maybe they did, maybe they didn't. Are my thoughts truthful? Are they accurate? Or is my judgment clouded by some of those half-truths? Or do I consider everything as it truly is? And then we might consider in relation to the world in general. There are so many things in society that are pure deception. Our culture runs on smoke and mirrors, illusions, the devil's bait. Social media often gets lambasted for this, and rightly so, for the portrayal that is oftentimes totally at odds with reality. You see this ideal family with all the vacation pictures that they share on Instagram and how wonderful everything is and how successful he is with his job and all the amazing things that they are doing, and you just think, boy, there's the perfect life. It probably isn't. It almost certainly isn't. It's an illusion. It's smoke and mirrors. Do I see through that smoke screen? Do I understand the true nature of the world and let that be the backdrop of my thoughts? That I'm trying to consider things as they honestly are, as they truly are in the world. Think of things that are true. Well, next Paul says, whatever is honorable, you consider. And again, I read from Barclay. This word can have different shades of meaning. I like his translation as the things that have the dignity of holiness on them. This word here, this honorable, is often used by the Greeks in association with their gods. It has to do with their view of their gods, that they're worthy of worship. Honorable, worthy of honor, worthy of some kind of praise or worship being given to them. It describes a person who moves throughout the world as if the whole world were the temple of God, as one has said. A person with honorable thoughts. This means avoiding flippancy and foolishness. Not in the sense that we have no sense of humor and can never laugh. And I'm too honorable and I'm too dignified to, you can't joke with me. We can't go do something that maybe would seem like a waste of time to other people. You can't go fishing if you're honorable. I mean, what's the dignity in that? Well, that's not what he's getting at. But in the sense that we can find both depth and height to our thoughts, that we can find true meaning instead of superficiality. I'm guilty of this more than I'd like to admit, which essentially, dishonorable thoughts in this case boils down essentially to spending so much time, filling so many hours in meaningless ways, with meaningless thoughts, silly things that aren't flagrantly bad, but they don't have the dignity of holiness. They don't have honor to them. Doom scrolling on your phone doesn't have honor to it. Spending time on everything else other than spiritual pursuits doesn't have the dignity of holiness. We fill our time with many things that are dishonorable, not because of visible, obvious, repellent sin, but because of sheer worthlessness. They just don't add up to much. They just don't really have any true honor or worthiness to them. Paul says next, the third idea. Consider whatever is just. This is righteousness, but especially as it pertains to duty and obligation. The just man is the man who takes care of his obligations, who does what is right. He is dutiful. If my thoughts are just, they're not only looking for the easy way. They're not trying to figure out, how do I get through life with minimum effort? I can tell someone something that will please them now and satisfy them for now and get them off my back so that I have an easier day. Or I can do what is just. Speak to them plainly and honestly, and maybe that will involve me having to get more involved than I wanted to. Or that might involve me making a sacrifice of my time. Doug talked in our class about how many times we feel inconvenienced by having to do something that is right, having to do something that is good for another person. But a lot of times, if we look at it honestly, and if we look at it as Christ looks at us, we would say, well, it's my obligation. It's my obligation to my fellow man to serve in this way. It's my obligation to my parents to help them with something and honor and respect them in this way. It's my obligation to my children to take the time necessary to teach them and train them and admonish them in the ways that they deserve. Those are my obligations. If I shirk those duties, if I don't really want to think about the best ways to do those things, I'm not being just. I'm not fulfilling my obligation. I'm not doing my job. Am I trying to figure out how to loaf my way through the workday with greatest convenience, or giving an honest effort in everything that I do as though I'm working for God Himself? What do we bend our mind towards? What are we more focused on accomplishing? The easy way or the right way, the just and fair way? He says then, consider what is pure. Purity is the idea of being clean, of being undefiled. And we see that being used biblically and otherwise with a couple of different shades of meaning, although maybe those kind of wrap around each other. We might think, as the Greeks did, as the Jews did, as Christians might, we might think of ceremonial purity, that which is fit to be in the presence of God. You see, especially in the Old Law, some things that are clean or unclean. And it doesn't really mean that those things are evil, that something bad has happened. You touch a dead body. Well, assuming you didn't kill the guy, you didn't do anything wrong, you just happened to come into contact with something that was unclean, and now you're unclean, ritually, ceremonially. That means you need to take care of something before you go into God's presence again. It doesn't mean that shrimp are wicked animals. It just means that God deemed them unclean. And so you are not supposed to eat them under that law. We might consider things in that way, but we think most often of a type of moral purity, which is, again, the same concept, but aimed in a different way, that we don't associate ourselves with things that are morally tainted and soiled. And we see how those two things flow into each other. There are plenty of behaviors, there are plenty of thoughts that are patently immoral, that make you unclean in every way and not fit to be in the presence of God, that don't belong in a mind that connects to God. Pornography is not clean. A fixation on hyper-violence that comes through our media is not pure. Ridicule and scorn and hatred for other people doesn't have purity within it. Deception, figuring out how to get one over on somebody, that's not pure. That doesn't belong in the throne room of heaven. There are so many things that we put into our minds that if our minds truly are where they should be. Jeremy read for us from Colossians 3 before I came up here. Put your mind with Christ. a mind, a life that is hidden with Christ, if that's where it truly is, we have to recognize so many things that can easily infiltrate our brains that have no business there, have no cleanliness or purity to them. Let's move on to the fifth, the idea of things which are lovely. The literal meaning there is something that is towards love. It is pros phileo. It is pro-love. It is towards love. Meaning they are the things that inspire love. They are the things, the actions, the deeds that are attractive to others. Think of what kind of person you like to be around. What people do you love? Aside from just, I love my kids because they're my kids, or I love my whoever it might be, person in close proximity to you just because you have to. Well, no, think about when you're choosing your friends, when you're picking the people that you spend time around, you're looking for qualities that are attractive to you. What kind of person do you like being around? Someone who is bitter and vengeful and unforgiving and critical and impatient and lewd and materialistic and greedy and boastful and selfish. Those are the kind of people we all like, right? No. You don't want to spend any time around that person. It's the opposite. We consider ways that are appealing to humankind. Not in a deceptive way to bend the crowd to our will or become popular just for the sake of it, but because an effective disciple in the world is one who enjoys a good reputation for character from his peers, one whose deeds instill admiration and love rather than hostility and disapproval. My mind must go, when I am considering myself, when I am considering my character, who I want to be, I have to consider what are the things I will do? What are the things I will say and be towards the people around me? And I have to come to the conclusion that I will pick those things that are lovely, that are universally admired and preferred by humans, that I will be charitable, that I will be forgiving, that I will be kind, that I will be patient, that I will be humble, that I will do all those things that we see Christ exhibiting, God imploring us to do, the New Testament recommending over and over. Those things appeal to people. Implement them in your lives. Now, our sixth trait, final one this morning, he says whatever is commendable, and that's a very similar idea to the last. This describes things that enjoy a good report. Some translations read that. Whatever is of good report. It means good things are said of it. If you were to be spoken of by others, would there be fair criticism? Or would there be really no criticism that one could make? Those are the thoughts that I want to have. That if I were to act as I think, and I will almost certainly, what will be said of it afterward? Would people give a good report of my behavior? Or would they say, he's kind of a jerk, kind of not the best person to be around? Good report. Your behavior and character, if they have modeled the earlier traits that we have talked about, that I dwell on what is true and honorable and just and pure and lovely, it'll be commendable. It will earn a good report. These are all tied together. They're less variations of thoughts that you can have than they are traits that all our thoughts must share. That is what the Lord wants from us. He wants it in our minds so that it will constantly be in our minds, so that it will come out in our actions, both towards Him and towards the world that He has made around us. Well, we ask again this morning, where does your mind go? Oh, I'm sure I'm talking to someone this morning who your mind was going somewhere while I was talking. Don't tell me afterward. Let me enjoy this, but I'm sure we had some mental doodling taking place in these last 30 minutes or so. When that happens, when you're drifting off during a meeting at work, when you're thinking about something while you're driving to go visit family, when you're doing the dishes and you got time to let that mind spin. Where does it go? How are you training it? What have you set it on? We can recommend nothing more than what our God has. And ultimately, we see that the thing that checks all of these boxes, that would fulfill all these requirements, if I want to consider one thing that is true, that is noble, that is just, that is pure, that is lovely, that is of good report, that is virtuous and praiseworthy, the very first thing that comes to my mind is the fact that the Son of God died so that I can live. That is true. That is excellent. That is deserving of praise. That inspires love. If I let that be my chief thought, my North Star governing principle, my gratitude for God offering me salvation through Christ, I will have a much easier time putting my mind where it should go. This morning we encourage you to think seriously about that true and noble and good thing that Christ did die to redeem the world of its sins. If this morning you've not taken advantage of that, you can, and we hope that you will. You can be baptized into Christ even today. You can repent of sin, become a Christian, become a disciple of the Lord by repenting and turning to Him. If we can help you, please let us do that. Come forward.